We're here, ladies and gentlemen.
We're live.
I forgot to take us off before we went live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
Oh, let's stay here.
We might as well just stay here.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to QR Codes. Quinlan and Rivoche here to tell you all the things you need to know about the secret history of the world. Anybody in the chat?
Let's have a look.
Oh my gosh, my internet.
Hello there, Skeleton. I see you popped in.
Yes. Welcome. Skeleton Core. What's up? How you doing, brother? Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, it's another edition of QR Codes, as it's now called, with yours truly and Paul Rivoche. How you guys doing tonight?
Well, I'm doing good. I've got giant orange eyes. It seemed appropriate. Giant glasses for a giant show.
It's perfect.
Blue blockers.
Amazing.
I don't know. Do you find that the screen, the blue light after a while staring at screens? Yeah.
It would, but I don't stare at screens too much. Like,
Yeah,
say for instance, I'm watching TV. I've got a projector, so it projects on the wall, and I don't
good
have
one.
that negative aspect.
Yeah, I probably spent too many years looking at like Cintiq and different things working in Photoshop. So I find the
Mhm.
light now, being a little bit older, it's true what they say, bugs your eyes. But anyway, there you go. So giants.
He says Paul's got some blade shades. Yeah, nice. Well,
They
thanks
do
for tuning
work.
in, everybody. We got four viewers here. Thanks, guys, for tuning
Nice.
in. Tonight's going to be a special show. We're talking about giants. Now, it's a difficult subject to broach because I mean, you could just. He says, Wilberforce Wooster says, "Why not QR codes?" What? What do you mean?
Cover that?
It is QR codes.
Well, Quinlan Rivoche, that's why QR codes. But yeah, no, I mean, is there a conspiracy around so-called conspiracy surrounding QR codes? There might be. I'm not aware of it. There's too many of these.
There's a million of them. And then you got to like scratch the surface of one code or one conspiracy, and you get into a million other ones.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's really the problem we're going to have tonight, because the subject of giants is so vast. It's so huge that sometimes you've just got to pick a spot to start at. Now, what I decided to do is pick a spot that many people will stop at. They'll say, you know, well, there's no like, you talk about giants and things like that. Well, where is that in the Bible? You know what I mean? I'm a Christian man. I don't believe that kind of nonsense,
Here
folks.
we go.
This is where it all starts. So let me share with you. I'm going to share Young's literal translation of the Bible. I prefer this translation the most. I think that this one is. I think if you have the capability to read this type of this type of the wording and the vocabulary that they use in these older forms of translation, if you have that capability, you're at a much better spot
Yeah,
because
when was this done, Patrick? Young's.
I don't know. I'd
But
have
it's an older one, like
Yeah, it's an older one, and you can tell by just the wording here.
okay.
So let me start here. This is Genesis 6. This is where it all begins, folks. Well, I mean, technically it begins Genesis 1, but anyway. And it cometh to pass that mankind have begun to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters have been born to them. So you can already see in the literal translation, they're not translating things into the tense that we use in English. It's just going to be the way that it was in the language that it was, which is great. And the sons of God see the daughters of men, that they are fair, and they take to themselves women of all whom they have chosen. And Jehovah saith, My spirit doth not strive in man to the age. In their erring they are flesh, and in his days have been numbered 120 years. The fallen ones were in the earth in those days, and even afterwards, when the sons of God come in unto daughters of men, and they have borne to them. They are the heroes of old, who from old are the men of name, or the men of renown. And Jehovah seeth that abundant is the wickedness of man on the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his evil or of his heart are only evil all day. So this is where we begin here. We begin in Genesis 6. Essentially, what we're talking about here, and this is the reason I mention this, is because this is essentially the origin of giant people. Now, you might say, well, there's no mention of giants here. Well, they mentioned the Nephilim, certainly. And the word here, the fallen ones, is actually translated directly from the word Nephilim. This is what that means. And so the question is how does this tie into giants? Well, I've got another thing here. Sorry if I'm a little back and forth, folks. It's one of those things where in order to get the full truth, you need to look at everything and you need to pull all of the
Yeah.
things that have something to do with one another together to create a coherent narrative, essentially, of what's happening. So I'm going to read from here, the Book of Enoch. You know what the Book of Enoch is, Paul?
Yeah, basically, yes. I haven't read it, but I've got the basic idea. Why don't you describe for people who I don't know how many viewers we have. But
Yeah. So the Book of Enoch is I can talk about it from the Catholic perspective. The Catholic perspective is it's a book of Apocrypha. It's not necessarily something that they include in the canonical Bible. So they're not saying that it's all bullshit, but they're also not saying that it's actually real and something that should be paid attention to. That, in my estimation, is a huge mistake on the part of the Catholic Church. They should just embrace it.
Yes.
The Book of Enoch goes into great detail about essentially Genesis 6, the Noah and flood narrative, and they go into detail about some of the stuff that happens at the end of times in Revelations.
Interesting. I've got to read it.
Oh, it's terribly fascinating, Paul. The first, like I would say, it's separated into several sections. There's one section that's quite dry and quite boring because the translation is closer to literal than anything else, and so it's hard to know exactly what they're talking about. But it's a point at which Enoch is taken up into heaven by the angels, and they show him all kinds of stuff. That's kind of the dry part. But the most interesting part is the very beginning. So I want to read some of these parts here.
Yeah, can I just quickly make the observation?
Sure.
When you said it's dry, that's a criticism that people make of the Bible in general. In fact, atheists say, like particularly the Old Testament, right? There's all those long chapters in the beginning, and so like particularly in Genesis, so and so begat so and so. But when you start getting the glimmering that maybe some of this was real, if you vault over that and accept that, makes it much more interesting, because they're talking about the longevity of hundreds of years. And they're talking about giants in those days, mighty men, like what you were reading, and you really start wondering what's going on. And I'll just throw this in quickly, and then you go to your thing. That years ago, when my daughters were young, one of them came home from school. And at that time, they were in a private school. So they had apparently a very eccentric teacher. And one of them came home and said, the teacher was talking about how there were giant insects in the old days. And I was like, what? And so apparently, Herodotus, there's a thing he wrote in one of his books. I meant to find the link for it, but I didn't get time. About giant ants, I think it was, in some primordial time. But he hadn't seen them. He had heard references to them. But I'm just mentioning things like this my daughter had a very quirky teacher. So I thought that was great even back then. But it's pointing back to the same thing, like in the Bible and in things like that. There's all kinds of scattered references to, even in our admitted existing literature, that people usually either disregard or they don't join them up. So you see where I'm going with that. Is once you admit that maybe there is something to this, it becomes much more interesting. And you go, well, okay, now what's the pattern?
Oh, yeah. 100%. And I find off of that point there, it's fascinating to me that, like, because when I was a kid and they were, you'd go to the science center and things like that.
Yeah.
And they would show you these exhibitions of prehistoric insects, and they were huge, right?
Right.
And I would go, thank God I'm not alive during that period of time. But science and archaeology will accept such statements at face value. They'll go, oh, yes, of course, there were cockroaches that were 3 feet long. Yeah, naturally. But then you say to them, well, how about humans that were maybe bigger than regular humans? And they're like, that's laughably ridiculous.
Yes.
So it's funny that dichotomy between, like, one thing is completely legitimate and the other one is like, you're a dummy.
Yeah. And, you mentioned millipedes the size of you.
Right, yeah.
You mentioned archaeologists. So that's interesting, because in preparing for the show, I was just digging through different things. And one of the things I was looking at was talking about the possibility. I think this is what they're alluding to. They didn't actually outright say this, but it made me think as I was listening to this video that and we can get into this, the whole notion or conspiracy thing about, did the Smithsonian Institution cover up evidence of giants and other things, basically all kinds of evidence from our history in earlier centuries. And as we got into the current era, they were tasked with covering it up. So that made me think of a related thing just right next door to that, which is, do archaeologists, is their task, or at least some of them, to hide history, not find and uncover, So
yeah.
I don't have any evidence for that, because, it does get into what people would think.
Well, I do.
Okay, good.
I've got personal evidence anyway. I mean, I don't know how else you could describe it, but when you say that, yeah, I mean, yes, I think personally that when you reach the highest levels of archaeology, when you're starting to get grants and funds from the United States federal government,
Yes,
amongst other governments across the world, I think that there is a like they weed out all of the people who won't play ball.
righto.
And if
Yeah,
you start to have, I think it's like this. I think they do a combination, a double weed out. And that might sound like a lot of fun to our friends of, 420, but it's not the same thing.
that's a good phrase.
Uh,
I'm going to write that down. Don't pull a double weed out on me,
double
Quinlan.
weed. I used to
Or-
pull a lot of double weed outs back in college, let's be honest. But anyway, what they do, I think, is they first determine whether or not you're a critically thinking individual. And
yes,
they love those people who are super intelligent but don't think critically. Those
right.
are their favorite kinds of people because
Same with
they can
politicians.
they can tell you exactly. Politicians are exactly the same. They can tell you what to believe and what the truth is, and you'll follow that because you don't critically think. And so then they don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to betray them in the future because they know you're already one of them and you're owned by them
Yeah,
and you have the same ideas as them. They would
absolutely.
never have somebody and give somebody money to upend their plans for things. So, for instance, let's just assume, for those staying at home here, that the federal government knows about giants and they don't want you to know about it. Well, they're certainly not going to hire somebody like me or Paul to be an archaeologist, and they're not going to pay them money to figure out if it's real or not. They only want you to essentially provide enough evidence to debunk those claims so that they can tell people that's what the truth is.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the first part is they determine whether or not you can critically think. If you can't critically think, then they're like, great, on to the next step. The next step is, will you toe the line? In
Right.
exchange for money or power or whatever it is that you're, that you're tempted by, will you essentially not engage in truth for money or power or whatever? And once they find that perfect person, then they put him in a position. So
Yeah.
like
And the
Neil
more they
deGrasse
get rooted
Tyson.
into that position permanently and their whole like identity, income,
Yes.
social network, it all depends on that. And the years go by and it's like roots. No one wants to disturb that once they've got that taste of money. So it all becomes to what you prioritize. Like, do you prioritize looking for reality and truth, or do you
Mm-hmm.
prioritize money above everything else? And it's not like it's either or. It's like everybody needs money,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like what are you really after? You can even make links of this to comics. There's always a pecking order, like mainstream comics, right? There's a pecking order. There's a way it works, and if you go and play ball with the big boys and you fit into their like paradigm, you eventually can work your way up the ladder. It's like that in anything, but the
Yes.
ladder doesn't go up in those things always because of like quality in art or truth or whatever it is. It's more about if you play ball, you get the dog treats given to you.
Yes.
Okay, you can go up another rung of the ladder, and it's like exactly what you're saying. That architecture paradigm is everywhere in the world.
Yeah. And it's funny when you say that, when you mention, when you bring comics into it, yeah, I mean, you have to think about, this is the exact same as it is for any grouping of people at all. Politics. I mean, you
Yeah,
only get into politics if somebody else was like, hey, you should pay attention to this guy. And then they question you and they see, are you willing to play ball? Okay, well then you're on our side. And this is the
yeah,
same for comics. It's the same for business. I work at a car dealership, right? If I walked into the car dealership and I said, fuck Hondas, I'm all about Toyotas, they'd be like, well, you're probably not the best fit here.
yeah, exactly.
See ya. So, and that's a less, that obviously involves less morality because that's just a
Yes,
matter of selling a product to people, and that's what it is at its face. But this is entirely different. Archaeology is something where money does have the final say, but the truth does not. But let's continue here, shall we? Because I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
even come at really any of these subjects from a empirical materialist view. I actually view empirical materialism as kind of it's useful, certainly, but it is not the end all be all as most people think that it is. because most people are materialist and they think that all things derive from material and that's that, and there's no such thing as the spiritual and yada yada.
Yeah.
But I think that there are truths that are based actually more on consciousness and motivation than on anything else. I've got a degree in psychology, but it's pretty useless as a degree. But what it did teach me is that everybody's got their motivation. Every single human on the planet, even if
Yes.
it's a petty, base motivation, like one that's inspired by their base, instincts for pleasure or food or whatever. Everybody has a motivation. And once you can figure out what their motivation is, you can start to pick apart what is real and what is not real.
Yes. Well,
So go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
no, I mean, you go to like what is real to them versus another person. Like you can't see inside people, you can't see their psychology. People's ideas, like the aspect of psychology that it always interested me is that, materialists will say it's only what we see and can touch and so on, but really people's ideas are so important because it shapes your decisions, it shapes the course of your life. And there's that old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. Well, what could it mean? Could it mean that what's the pen? The pen writes ideas.
Yes.
And so like ideas are very, very powerful, but what you accept or what you reject as being true, it can even be easily a matter of life and death, what you listen to and what you make a component of your own thinking. So, and that might even get into things like giants, and things like what people say are so-called conspiracies. Giants might not be a subject that are directly related to whether you live or die, but certainly in the medical field, right? Like what you accept as a good treatment or a bad treatment for whatever it is might make a really big effect on your existence, your continued existence. So yeah, psychology is very interesting, but it's the immaterial, right? So it's the non-material. So
well, I mean, if you think about it, and then I'll have to get back to the Book of Enoch here, but
yeah.
I get on these tangents. But if you think about it, I mean, God himself, right? At first, God is just an idea. Like God is the idea, right?
Yes.
And then because of the word, and this we could take from biblical literature, but you can also take it from other literature of other religions, that there was nothing, there was nothing at all, and then there was an idea for something, and then there was a word spoken, and then everything became physical, or the physical things that are physical came into being. So at the core of everything, there's an idea. And so what I'm trying to say is that I got on my tangent and I forgot where I was going. The point is that consciousness is the base of all of existence. I mean, even scientists, even today, for instance, we found out that there were atomic particles, and then we found out there were subatomic particles. And now guess what, folks? When we look into the subatomic particles, guess what we find? Guess what they're made up of? Nothing at all. They're made up of literally nothing. But they still operate. They still operate, and they still do what they were intended to do, which implies that the subatomic particles don't operate off of physical mandates so much as spiritual mandates or conscious mandates.
Yes.
They do what they do because they're willed to do so, because that is the will that they have to do. There's no other reason. There's no physical explanation for why they operate the way they do, and then become subatomic particles, and then become atomic particles, and then become molecules, and then become human people like us. There's no explanation for it. It's all space. There's nothingness. At the core of everything physical is nothing, which is terribly fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely a back and forth between, like I was saying, between your ideas and what manifests. And, some people have this stuff about the law of attraction, but they don't talk about that it has to go into actions. They don't always talk about that. It's not just imagining stuff and then it's going to act in reality. But there is a back and forth between, your thoughts and particularly your visualization. And it doesn't even have to be drawing visualization. It can be anything. Your day ahead, like you're half awake, you're waking up, you think about what should I do today? What you visualize and decide, oh, I want to do that versus that. It's all being pre-crafted in some kind of mental room, mind's eye. And then if you act on it, you pick one and you act on it, you manifest it into reality. So that is very powerful. And it's how you change yourself. And when I've been coaching people about drawing, that's the concept I try and get across, is that it's not just woo-woo weirdo stuff. It's you have to grapple with your own psychology in a very literal way, like what I just described, because or else nothing will happen. It doesn't even have to be about drawing. It could be about learning anything. But if you have an ambition and you see the steps, well, that's the first thing. Figure out the steps, but then you don't actually activate it, nothing's going to happen. So there's kind of a back, and then when you manifest it in reality, the material world, then that can also change your ideas based on experience. There's sort of a round thing, but this is a good answer to people who say, oh, well, it's only material. Well, then I've said to people in conversations, well, what about your bank account? Or what about a relationship? You believe you have relationships with people, right? You sense what they are, good or bad, the nature of them. Well, you can't prove that to someone else. You can't take your relationships out of your pocket like a wallet and say, here's all my relationships.
Relationships are even different than your bank account. I mean, your bank account, you could make the argument, oh, well, it's electronic ones and zeros that are stored on a chip somewhere. Okay, so it's physical to a degree. But relationships, you cannot. There's no ones and zeros stored somewhere where you can go, well, look, you can bring up your relationships and be like, look, I've got good relationships.
Yeah. To quantify it. There's no way to quantify it.
Which makes it all that much more beautiful, doesn't it? When you can't quantify it.
Absolutely.
So we just read Genesis 6 from the Young's Literal Translation. This is the book of Enoch, which you'll find is startlingly similar, but adds extra details here. So I'm going to go along here. And it came to pass, I'm right here at number 1 here. And it came to pass that when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semyaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty for this great sin. And they all answered him and said, let us all swear an oath and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together and bound themselves. Just a side note, I love that old-timey language. Then swear they all together. Beautiful. Yes. And by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders. Semlazas, their leader. I don't know why they didn't just put Semyaza as they put earlier. Aralkba, Ramael, Kokabliel, Tamliel, Ramliel, Daniel, Ezekiel, Barahikiel, Azael, Armerios, Barterel, Ananel, Zakiel, Zamsapil, Saratel, Turil, Yomyael, Sariel. These are the chiefs of tens. And for the record, folks, I think that these motherfuckers right here, these people, these entities are the reason for all of suffering on all of the earth. These fuckers right here.
These are the rebel angels, right?
Yes. I think these are the pieces of shit that caused all the stuff that we've got to deal with throughout all of history. Right there. It's right there. Okay, chapter 7. And all the others by the way, it's also fascinating, and this makes me think that this is actually more real than it not. When he's like, Semyaza was like, they all, they were talking about having sex with human women, and they're angels, and they're not supposed to do that. And he knows that, and they all know that. And he's like, I'm afraid you guys are all going to blame it on me. Like, you guys are going to blame it all on me if we go down and do this. They're like, no. We'll make an agreement. We'll all, bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, as they say. I find it fascinating. His self, what's the word? He's trying to keep himself safe. What's that word? Anyway.
Exempt himself? No.
Self, I don't know. The point is that he's worried about himself. He's worried about his own, what's going to happen to him if they all do this. So he's very specific about being like, you guys can't all blame this on me, which I find is
the self-preservation. You're thinking
self-preservation.
Yeah, and you're saying they made a pact, like PACT, a pact.
Yes.
Where it's like an agreement. We're all going to hold, in a circle where we're all going to do this together. So it's like a gang.
Mm-hmm. Well, isn't it fascinating too that like Jesus Christ, for instance, didn't make a pact with anybody. He just
Yeah.
he just incarnated on the planet because that's what he was, because he's God and he can just do that kind of thing. You
Yeah.
don't hear the good angels making pacts with one another. But
No.
these ones, they're worried because they know what's going to happen if they do this kind of thing, or they think of things that might happen. So they're like, well, if one of us is going to go down, it's going to be all of us. And it's fascinating because it's how
Yeah.
people who are evil in the real world act,
Yes.
in like gangs, for instance. Like, well, if I'm going down, you're all coming with me. It's like, okay.
Yeah, because they know that they've been disobedient to the angels that were obeying God's order. They're under his authority still
Mm-hmm.
and obeying. Whereas if you're disobedient, you're on your own. So then you have all these, they want to bind
Precisely.
together in their own set of authority or rules, which is really what humans do when they defy obedience to the greater order, which is really like we were talking about maybe on one of the other streams. Like when you look into this stuff like the level playing world or whatever, it's not always wackiness. Like if you realize there is something to it, it can definitely lead you back to realities in the Bible or even things like in the Book of Enoch. Like it certainly did for me. Like to take it in a much more literal way, not as mythology. Some of the if I get a chance later, maybe to quickly share a few things. I looked up what Wikipedia and different places say about giants, and they present it as mythology.
Right.
There's the whole narrative of it's being called hoaxes and that it's been thoroughly debunked.
Yes.
And it even mentions the Smithsonian. So anyway, all of these topics are fascinating to me, and perhaps more people than ever are catching on that it's not just some weird toy that you play with because it's kooky and quirky. And it's like Netflix, but for conspiracies. It's more like, that's why I don't even like the word conspiracy. It's more like they're topics that are usually forbidden. But when you realize we're just put in this little narrow bubble of ideas, and all the ones outside that little bubble are called, laughably stupid and false and hoaxes and all the rest of it. When you realize that those lands beyond, there may be mentally and literally, there may be the answers that everyone's looking for their whole lives for more meaning. That's what that's what I love about this stuff. So please continue. This is interesting.
Yeah. And so okay, so let me keep going here.
Chapter 7.
And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. That's a curious little note there, that they only chose one. And they began to go in onto them and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them okay, first of all, they began to go in onto them and to defile themselves with them. It doesn't say, I mean, and this could be maybe a translation issue, but it doesn't say that they defiled the women per se, so much as they themselves defiled themselves by having intercourse with human women.
Yeah.
A fascinating note.
And you wonder, where did this all start? If, this being real.
Yeah.
Like, who was the first? And did it say there? Maybe I missed it. But the idea is that, like anything growing and becoming a movement, and it's the whole rebellion in God's world, like these angels. And maybe that's getting us away from giants. But anyway, do continue. This is interesting.
The subject of angels and giants is they're directly married to one another. I have to be honest. And I think sometimes you've got to go backwards. So some people that might not believe in angels, and that's fine. That's not going to be, this whole conversation isn't going to be selectively about biblical backing for giants. But I wanted to give people a biblical background for, okay, so giants are possible per the Bible, which is something you may or may not believe. And then secondly, there's other things that also corroborate the existence of giants. So, okay, they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. So now we're talking about a form of cannibalism. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh, so 100% cannibalism, and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. So I hate to cut the Book of Enoch off here because now it's just getting interesting. But that's the Book of Enoch's take on giants, and they specifically state it right there.
Yeah.
I guess from there, let's see here. Skeleton Core says, because divine entities engaged in the carnal, baser desires of the flesh, the sin of lust, precisely. And so, excuse me. Actually, later, this is why I would encourage everybody to do whatever you can to go get the Book of Enoch. You know what I did? I literally printed this sucker off at work. And they're like, why are you printing 300 pages of text? I'm like, don't ask me questions. And I printed the whole thing off, and I've got it right now. And I've taken a highlighter to it and pens and stuff. And it's terribly fascinating. It is the most fascinating thing outside of the Bible. And I would say this much, to actually on a point that you were making, Paul, that once you consider that some of these things are real and that they could be real, and then you go back and you read the Bible, it makes the Bible like 1,000 times more interesting. I was so bored with the Bible my whole life. I gotta be like, the only things that were interesting to me was the New Testament because it dealt with morality and it was Jesus Christ. And it's all very cut and dry. And like I'm a big fan of Jesus, big fan. And he really helped out the lesser races of the Nephilim descent like me. And but like that's one thing. And a lot of people just stop right there. And there's a lot of good holy people. Like I'd say my mother, for instance, she's got no interest in any of this conspiratorial giants, Nephilim, sons of God stuff. She's got no interest in it whatsoever. But she doesn't really need to because she follows Jesus and that's her focus. And that's really the only thing she cares about. So there's a great many good holy people who don't really need to know any of this. But then there's people like me who, like, you can tell me what's good and what's true, but I'm not going to believe it until I go out and look for it for myself. And
I mean, we sound similar because what always bothered me, which I know is a very common thing with people, is that there was no coherence or alignment between not only aspects that are usually overlooked by most churches, such as what we're talking about, like giants and the longevity and the mystical aspects of the Bible, but then also the cosmology, because what people are forced to do is smash together all these irreconcilable ideas, like the idea that we're on a water ball spinning through vast empty space made for no reason. Mm-hmm. A lot of people still reject that and they just cling to that because they got told to that when they were little, and I did too. But the thing is, it destroys for a lot of people, it destroys faith because it's totally nonsensical and it doesn't align with the Bible and belief. So that when you come back to it, as we're talking about, and that's what the so-called flat earth or level plane world stuff did for me, really looking into it seriously and considering it, I realized that now there's an alignment. Okay, so it makes sense because when you go back to Genesis 1 and you're astounded that it matches 1-to-1, it's being described in there. So like what you're touching on, Patrick, it shows you that the Bible is a literal story of the world. It's the guidebook, it's the explanation you've been looking for. And the Old Testament is the history of the earlier Earth ages. It's like the best science fiction story ever.
I know. It's so crazy.
It's like, and in fact, I'll throw this in as a religious thing too. It's very brief, but I don't pretend to explain this very well. But there's a woman I follow, a Greek woman on X, who makes postings. And she was making she's been going through Revelation, and she's been doing a commentary on it because she's describing the Greek Bible translation and comparing it to modern ones. Anyway, one of the things that I twigged on in one of her tweets a few days ago was very interesting, and I hadn't heard this before. She was saying that, let me see if I can recreate this, that she was saying that the people who are, I think this is what she said, the people who are here on Earth now, you and me and everyone else, we're part of the fallen 1/3 of humans who in an earlier Earth age joined the rebellion, But because God loves humanity and wants everyone to have a second chance, our memories were erased and we were sent back here to have one more chance of repentance in our life, to see the true way things are. And when I read that, I was like astounded. I was like, that resonates with me. I don't even know if I, as I said, reproduced exactly what she was getting at, but if that's what it was, I was like, why do, and many people have said this, it's not original to me. It's like, why can't we remember? Like my earliest memories are being about 2 or 3, 4, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But why is our memory erased? Like, and then there's people who say we come back to Earth over and over and we live again and reincarnation. And the Hindus believe that, there's all kinds of different things. But why would we do that and not remember? But then when I read this is an completely alternate view, it's like we lived once, we had a chance at eternal life, we were part of God's original creation, we rebelled. It's something about, maybe you know something about this. And again, we're drifting a little off giants, but if these third of angels that rebelled, did they take a third of humanity with them?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Oh,
And I base that off of several different texts that imply
okay.
that there were humans who were all about all of this stuff that the angels were doing.
So then does that resonate with you? Does that make sense? Because
Yes and no. I would say the idea of reincarnation is how would I put it? The idea of reincarnation sometimes feels to me like a cop out, in the sense of like, well, if I don't make it this time, there'll
yeah,
be another chance for me to do it next time.
no,
And
I
it's
agree.
like, that's not the point.
I don't think she
Um,
was saying that we're reincarnated. She's saying that she doesn't agree with that she's trying to claim that the Bible says that in God's mercy, he sent us back here again. The humans that are incarnated or born in this age are not really reincarnations, but we're being even given a second chance. But that's why we can't remember anything.
Now that would be, well, first of all, that would make like, it does seem sometimes hard for me to believe that God would give you one chance without giving you the full ability to understand everything, and then go, all right, well, you're damned. You made the wrong choice.
Right.
So there, an all-loving, all-knowing God, it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
seem like he would do something like that. So yeah, I can get on that side of things. And I personally do believe that, whether or not I used to be one or whatever, like, I do believe that my genetic bloodline comes from Nephilim,
Mm-hmm.
like the crazy, sexually depraved, cannibalistic sons of bitches that just made the world an awful place and posed themselves as gods throughout what we would consider more recent history, the past 20,000 years or so. So
If you believe,
on that side of things, I would say, yeah, like I can get behind that.
if you believe the world is that old, see, there's so many things that are up in
Oh,
the
I
air.
do. Oh,
You
I
do,
100% do. Yeah, I believe it at the very least. Well, I believe that the age of gods and the men of renown, the old gods, I call them.
yeah, yeah.
And by old gods, I mean these are literally just angels that came down from heaven. So they're what we now consider demons. Um, but they are amongst their disembodied souls of their offspring, the Nephilim, which are a separate. The Nephilim aren't the angels that came down from heaven. The Nephilim are the offspring of the
Yes.
angels and humans. But both of those groups of people no longer have bodies, and they operate as disembodied spirits. And I think that's where like, if you were, for instance, followed, like, everybody says what they want about the Catholic Church. At the very least, the Catholic Church has the most complicated, by complicated, I mean like very specific demonological information on the planet of any religion ever. They know
Interesting.
exactly who's who and why and when, and then you ask, like, well, how do they know that stuff? So there's where the Catholic conspiracy comes in.
Yeah,
But um, the demons operate in a hierarchical setting exactly the same way that the angels do. It's just inverted. Um, that's another tangent that I'm going into, when I was trying to say that. Oh man, I completely forgot what I was trying to
it's
say.
okay.
So let me read what Skeleton Core has to say.
Okay, and I've got something I could present here if you want.
Yes, and yeah, okay. So Om Seti allegedly remembers her former life as a priestess of Seti, even found buried things that nobody knew existed. But she was all, no, that's where I remember it being, and there it was. I've heard these kinds of things. This is fascinating stuff. And so when I say, oh, reincarnation's not real, I'm just saying, like, from my opinion, I can't say for sure. And at the same time, Om Seti could have been informed, because there are actually demons who are specifically tasked with knowing where hidden things are, and you can contact them and get in touch with them and find those hidden things. But then it's like, well, your soul's kind of fucked now. So
Yeah, because
good job, brother.
Like, yeah. I mean, it really comes down to like what you're touching on there. With all this stuff, it's like, what do you believe? Because you have the bedrock of your thinking, and then you got subsequent things built up on top of it. There's always structures like that. So when you start questioning the bedrock, which is what we're doing here, things get really interesting. So I don't know if you can present I presented my screen to you, but can you? Yeah. So this is, people may or may not have heard of this guy, but see, when we get into the modern age, giants and giant people would only be in a category like this. Like, this is a man called Robert Wadlow. Who was, it says here, 8'11". I remember hearing bits and pieces about him when I was younger, in the news, like there'd be little articles, but it's presented as being just a complete anomaly and a genetic anomaly. Like, he was in Illinois, he was continued growth in adulthood was due to hypertrophy of his pituitary gland, which results in abnormally high level of human growth hormone. So these things are revealed openly, but the thing is that you start getting into questions like, were there lots more, but they just were not famous? There's one other person. See, there's a picture here, for example, of him, beside, it's not enlarging anymore, but beside his father. Isn't that incredible?
Jeez.
And I'll show you the other one. Sorry, I'm trying to change my sizing here.
You're fine.
There's only one other person mentioned in this article down here. 1 year before his death, Wadlow passed John Rogan as the tallest person ever recorded.
Joe Rogan's pretty short, though. Oh, John Rogan. Sorry.
Joe Rogan. It was this man. It was an American sharecropper who was recorded as the tallest non-mobile person ever, the second tallest person ever at 8 feet 9 inches tall.
Wow, look at that guy.
And let me see if there's more. Hang on, pictures here. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then, there's all sorts of pictures on the internet of various people, even I think some current or some past. It's always very difficult to determine now, particularly now in the last year or two, which is AI and which is real historical photos. But can I present one other thing?
Please.
Yeah. So this is, I may or may not read all this, but what anyone watching this, maybe even later or now, you got to decide if you're a number 1 or a number 5, and I'll explain what I mean. So I was trying to think about how you would make a gradation of the attitudes towards, say, giants, or even to anything. And I was trying to examine my own mind and put it into categories. And these are not rigidly exact, but you'll see what I mean. So it goes from the most normal to the most bizarre, which would be a number 5. And again, you could apply this to any other so-called conspiracy. So the number 1 is normie. And this is how normies would see it, like, because they'd say the accepted fact is what it said right there in a moment ago in Wikipedia. There's occasionally pituitary, abnormalities, but everyone else, humans are the size we are. We've always been that size. There's nothing in history to indicate otherwise. And I've got a link about that, about skeletons and all that stuff. But anyway, the number 1 basic view would be giants don't exist and never existed. If giants are thought of at all, it's only as mythological beings, just entertaining stories from the profoundly ignorant past. Any evidence such as unearthed skeletons is simply isolated examples of rare pituitary giantism. Goliath in the Bible is just a story, a myth, a lesson, a moral lesson or whatever.
Which, real quick before you move on, I love how they mentioned Goliath in the Bible. That's like one of the 7 to 8 references of giantism in the Bible. But okay.
Yes, exactly. But people don't they don't usually focus on these things, like we said earlier in the stream. So number 2, going one little step up, would be, well, giants may have existed in the distant past, but only back then. They're not worth considering, and they have no relevance for today's enlightened and modern world. So they're admitting that they existed. There might have been sort of foggy. Then you go a step next and you say, giants existed in the ancient past and were unearthed in many places, including North America. the skeletons, this is getting into the conspiratorial, what people consider conspiratorial.
Sure.
The skeletons were confiscated by the Smithsonian Institution, and alternate fake narratives were created like about history. The giants lived in a time otherwise the same, though, as ours, the world, and were coexistent with our-sized humans in a normal-sized world. And I didn't add in there, but it would be like the evolution narrative that there was, millions of years and whatever. They were in some past, there were giants, but everything was otherwise the same. So number 4, I tried to stuff in. This is like only a rough sketch of everything we're talking about. I was thinking, what's the next level? Would be giants existed in the past, perhaps even until much more recently, but were hidden. Then were hidden by like fake history that we're given. Adam and Eve were giants in an earlier pre-flood earth age in which everything was larger: plants, insects, trees, animals. The Nephilim were there. I haven't put this along a timeline, but perhaps even immense titans walked the earth. And I've got a link about that, which I could show later. God destroyed, this would be the biblical narrative. God destroyed and mostly erased this earlier version of the world and reset everything, making us miniature as we are today. But then I put to myself the question, and I said, this is just like a loose thought sketch. I said, okay, but if Noah's Ark was real, was Noah a giant? And if so, when did everything get miniaturized? Afterwards? So you get into these questions because Noah was listed as one of the earliest humans, right?
Right.
So, and then there's people who believe that the great trees were cut down, which is why we have plateaus like Devil's Tower. And there's hundreds or thousands of these examples around the world. Great trees were cut down by God's angels, and the entire fishbowl or terrarium we live in was flooded from the waters above and below. The windows of heaven were opened. And then I'm almost through this. He made the insects even more tiny. See Herodotus' reference to giant insects. And some biblical people, this is what I just mentioned a moment ago, Patrick. Some biblical people think we here on earth today are on our last chance for redemption. We're the 1/3 of humanity who followed Satan and I guess the rebel angels in the fall. But God in his mercy has erased our memories and then sent us here to have the last chance to repent. And then the last category, I'll finish this off. Number 5, this is like even sort of building on the number 4. Giants still exist underground or in the hollow earth or at the North Pole and on other hidden continents, either in our oceans or even beyond our ice wall, Antarctica and or the dome firmament. Like there's people who believe that the North Pole is land and there's a magnetic mountain there and it's off limits for a reason. And then you start thinking, well, what if it's warm and they're actually living giants? Kevin, you want to read that, Patrick? Or?
Well, sometimes I just pop them up because they go by too fast. I don't want them to go by without me popping them up on the screen. Paul, where do you think I am on this list? And then where are you on this list?
Okay, good. And then we should go to Kevin's got some good questions here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think in fact, as I said, this is not 100% exact. It's something that could be worked on, but anyway, I think I'm at 3.8, I'm, in other words, or I'm at like a 4. I don't know if I believe everything in number 4 here, but I'm basically there, like, and I'm trying to figure out how it all fits together into, again, what I said earlier, a coherent picture, because things should be somewhat coherent,
Right.
I'm not saying I could explain everything or you could, but when you have all these questions, they at least fit into a coherent pattern of relationship, rather than, like I said earlier, the idea of a spinning water ball and millions and billions of years of earth and all this is just completely mad. And it doesn't fit with what the Bible says, that whole picture. So you have to sort of sort these things out. And depending on what you pin down, say, these are my tent poles, I'm pinning my mental tent here, you get different pictures emerging. So I guess to answer your question, I'm basically a 4, maybe minus a little.
You said 3.8, 3.9, would you say?
Yeah, so where are you?
Okay. No, I want you to guess real quick and then I'll tell you.
I'd say you're probably a 5.
Yeah, I'm a 5. 100%.
What number are you, Kevin? you don't have to say if you don't want to.
Yeah, you folks in the chat, Skeleton Core and Kevin, let us know if you where you
don't
are.
Have to, you don't want to, no pressure. But if you want to present some of his questions, I mean, you take it where you want. Because I've got more things I could show here.
Well, can you bring up? You said you had a video. I need to go to the bathroom really quick, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. But if you could play that video while I'm
Okay.
gone, that would, I think, be efficient.
Yes, I've got a couple. I've got a shorter one and a longer one, but I'll just wing it with these.
Do
Yeah,
the
no problem.
shorter one because I'll come back pretty quickly here. And
yeah.
And I'll
okay, this
jump
is
in.
3 minutes.
Make it big screen, would you?
Okay, yes, I will.
I'll be right back, folks.
Good
Sorry.
point. Good point. Okay, this is from a channel called The Archivist, and it's really interesting. I think I'm not sure if he's on X, but he's got great videos. I mean, as ever with this stuff, there's way too much stuff to watch, and I actually didn't even watch this whole thing. But yeah, well, let's just have a listen. I'm just pausing to pop in and say, this channel is very much about, he gets very extensive digging into old newspaper archives, as you can see here. And again, these things are dismissed as being hoaxes or fanciful old newspaper articles, but he combs over them and he's found incredibly fascinating stuff about erased history. And because some of these are still available. Well, it used to be on microfilm, but I think that a lot of them are probably in places like the Internet Archive. But anyway, here we go.
I'm back. Sorry.
Yeah.
What do we got here?
Well, I was saying to the viewers that this is from a channel called The Archivist. It's only 3 minutes and 15 seconds. It's just a clip the guy published. But he is centered around unearthing all kinds of old newspaper articles, which he was showing on screen a moment ago.
Yeah.
And, evidence for different things about all the possibly the real history that they were, that the newspapers 100, 150 years ago, whatever, were recording. Now, again, as I said a moment ago, this is now positioned as being, oh, well, those old newspapers, they were fanciful. Some of them were hoaxes. They were dummies. They published all this stuff, but it's not real. It's
right.
This weirdo fantasy.
Unlike real life nowadays, where the newspapers only print truth.
Exactly. So, to the contrary of that, this guy is digging through and showing that, what if this stuff that they were showing in all these old newspapers, that's why his channel is called The Archivist. What if it was all basically real, that they were just publishing stuff that they were finding?
I don't think there's any sound.
Oh, no sound?
Doesn't seem like it.
Do I have to do something?
So pull out of sharing this and then reshare it. But when you reshare it, there's an option, I think, for allowing sound.
Oh, wait, hang on. Sorry.
Sometimes people unclick that, and that's why it won't show sound.
So I go remove from stage?
Yeah.
Thanks,
you
audience.
You have to reshare it.
Yeah. I represent it. Stop sharing. Okay, here we go. I'm going to present it again. Thanks for your patience, watchers.
While you're doing that, I'll read. Kevin Wolf says, I think the giants of the late 19th century are linked to the incubator/Cabbage Patch babies. They probably weren't Neffs, also actual midgets who had tiny bodies completely in proportion. Also actual midgets who had tiny bodies completely in proportion. They probably weren't Nephilims, also actual midgets. The grammar of this sentence is confusing me. Are you saying... I'm sorry, Kevin. Can you specify what you're saying there? Because it seems like you're saying...
Have you heard of the Cabbage Patch thing?
Well, one, no. Yeah, I've not heard of the Cabbage Patch thing. I was going to...
Yeah, I don't know. I watched a few videos of that about 6 months ago, Kevin. I'm not sure I can recreate it accurately for people, but there's this whole thing about repopulation and very odd... what's the channel called, Kevin?
He says both giants and midgets existed during this period. I see what you're saying.
Well, this idea that relatively recently there was a different world that's been erased from our memory. And then there was this thing about orphan trains, right, Kevin? And like repopulation, incubators in World's Fairs. There's all this wild stuff that, again, I'm not up on it enough to...
So when you say midgets, Kevin, you're referencing people who are proportionally sized. They're just smaller, right? That because dwarves are like you say, dwarfs, which are defective growth of normal sized people. That's what you're saying, right? Because midgets has, generally speaking, been used to describe dwarfs. He says correct. Okay, perfect. All right. Because in my life, it's all, you hear the word midget and everybody's just referencing a person with dwarfism. But okay, I see what you're saying now. Now we're talking about legit midgets. Okay. Legigits.
I didn't see, by the way, Patrick, I shared this to you, but I didn't see any setting to, let me see if
let's see if it makes noise.
Maybe my sound is turned down. I know my sound's up. Okay, let's see. Can the audience, can you hear?
Audience, can you hear because I can't hear anything. Do you guys hear something?
I'm going to throw a 1 if they can hear in the chat, if they can hear this.
Yeah, put a 1 in the chat if you can hear put a 2 if you cannot hear what this video is playing. I'm relying upon you, Kevin. I'm relying upon you too, Skeleton Core.
Oh, no, can't hear. Okay, I'll stop. I don't know what the deal is.
Interesting. Thank you, Skeleton.
Okay, well, we can just do chat, or maybe you have something else. I've got 1 or 2 other.
Well, yeah, I also I've got some I want to keep, so let's do this.
Okay.
For people out there, is this still biblical? I want to go back to the Bible here. Because for a lot of people, the Bible is the only thing they're going to listen to, and that's fair enough because it's the most useful book in the history of humankind. But before I get into this section from the Bible, I would like to make this statement to people. If you're one of those people who says, I need it to be in the Bible for it to be legitimate and to care about it and focus on it, I'm not judging you. I'm not saying that that's a bad opinion to have. What I am saying is be consistent. I'm a Christian, and I'm a Christian because I believe in Jesus Christ. And the reason I believe in Jesus Christ is it's a combination of the things that he did and said while he was on the planet, which you can find in the New Testament, in the Gospels. But, I mean, half of that stuff that you find in the New Testament and the Gospels is kind of predicated upon prophecy and things that you find in the Old Testament. So to say that he's the Messiah, for instance, is very specifically something that you would have to have gleaned from comparing the Old Testament, the things they said in the Old Testament, to what Jesus is now, and him now being the Messiah. So for me, it honestly blows my mind that there are so many Christians out there, people who say they're Christians and say, I believe in Jesus Christ. And they say, but the Old Testament's all kind of, it's just kind of nonsense. Like, it's not literal. That statement is like mind-blowingly stupid to me if you think that Jesus is the Messiah. Why on earth? What possible reason would you have to believe that he's the Messiah if you don't believe any of the holy book leading up to that would imply that he's the Messiah? So when it comes to being a Christian, like, and this is why all this whole subject is so important to me, because as I was coming up, I would read these stories about giants, or I'd read these, all the stuff that happens in the Old Testament. And my teachers from a Jesuit high school, note that, would say things like, none of this is real. It's not literal. It's just, symbolic and yada, yada, yada. That would mean that my entire religion is not real. My entire religion is symbolic. My entire religion is based upon nonsense and bullshit and lies, if that's the case. Right? But
exactly.
So I spent my whole life leading up to this. I know. I'm on the wrong thing. I got to restart my...
Okay.
Here we go. Does this sound better?
Yeah, you're good. And by the way, I think I figured out, we can go back to that after you. I think I figured out, if people will bear with me one more time, I'm pretty sure I figured out technically why that wasn't playing. It's because to present visuals, I share my entire screen on my Cintiq here.
Yeah.
But now I've just shared it as a Chrome tab, which does have sound. And I remember reading, as I said, anyway, it gets technical, but the StreamYard stuff, there's a lot to learn about it. But
Well, let me finish my rant, and then we'll go back to what you were saying.
Yeah. Oh,
Finishing my rant here, I would
yeah,
say
please.
the Old Testament, like if you're going to say the Old Testament didn't happen, then none of your fucking religion happened and none of it's real. And it's all just based on fanciful nonsense. That's really the way I feel. Like at this point in my life, that's where I'm at. I used to be on that same side. Like, oh,
Yeah.
well, the Old Testament's not literal, but we can still believe in Christianity and believe this, yada, yada, this, that, and the other. No, you can't. No, you can't. Either it's real or it's not real. Like that's
Yeah,
really what it comes down to.
Yeah, because I've seen people criticize the watered down versions of Christianity and Jesus, and this is really aligning with how I used to be about it. Is that when you really start digging into it and you want to figure out, is this real or not? People who don't want to go into that, they sort of retreat and they end up with a very watered down Jesus. That's the Bible churchy, play guitar and just, it's a very like sort of nice enough, kind thing, which is obviously good. It's better than being bad. But what they've done is stripped out all the mysticism and all the incredible power of these things like what we're talking about, or the idea of resurrection, that really, Jesus being God, he can manifest his body on earth after 3 days again and come back to life. Like that's so incredibly impossible to our normal way of thinking. It's a miracle. It's
right.
So people don't want to grapple with that because you have to accept that if you want to accept full biblical narrative. So of course, in our modern materialistic, very literal world, like we were talking about earlier, people just find that a bridge too far and they have no access point to moving over to that. What I was trying to say earlier, and you may or may have not have found this, Patrick, is when I came across these other things that I at first thought were just ridiculously stupid conspiracy ideas like flat earth, when I actually got past it's a pie-shaped island floating in space, which is not what people believe. That's just monstrously dumb. It's mixing two paradigms and in creating just an idiotic.
It's a straw man argument.
So when you move through that, then it becomes an on-ramp into looping back around, and you find yourself going down this highway, and you end up back at the Bible. And I've seen lots of testimonies on X or on different channels I've watched where people say the same thing. It's like, and the same thing happened to me. You're very startled because you suddenly one morning you wake up or some moment and you go, wait, this actually now it aligns and it explains in a way, the Bible, although, the full skeptics will still say, well, you still don't have proof. But then I would say, no, I don't have literal proof. I mean, Jesus didn't appear in my living room, but I do have proof that I was being profoundly lied to by all these narratives about the curve of the horizon, and all this stuff that boats going over the horizon and all this nonsense, or that the Earth's atmosphere is stuck to the planet by the power of gravity, but butterflies can just fly around freely, or smoke can come up from chimneys. Well, is gravity intelligent? And it's like, oh no, but that's because smoke is lighter.
I'll leave smoke alone today.
Anyway, so yeah, I see where you're going with that. It's like you have to embrace some of these deeper things about the Bible, the Old Testament.
It's just a matter of I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying, if you were to believe, if you're a Christian person, if you're a religious person, and you're saying, I believe yada 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 XYZ about Christianity, it seems hypocritical to, on the one hand, accept essentially what are just kind of the moral, not even the moral aspects of it, but then to take all of the historical, or in some people's opinions, pseudo-historical aspects of it and throw that baby out with the bathwater. It just seems like, where do you think all of this came from? And to assume that every other human before the year, essentially, because this is the way people act these days, to assume that every person before the year 1901 was just an unmitigated retard who was completely ignorant to the way that the universe worked is I mean, come on.
No, it's super arrogant. And I mean, well, that's what people say, but I didn't explain it very well. But if you're interested in that stuff, I don't know where you are with this stuff, Skeleton. And really, my ambition is not to persuade anybody, but anybody interested in looking into this, I think I said this on another stream, look up the original, what is it called? The OG? What does that stand for? OG, the
Original gangster.
Yeah, is Eric Dubé. He has a channel.
Wait, can you say the original gangster, Eric Dubé, please? Our chat will love it.
The original gangster, Eric
Dubé.
And then there's, although I don't agree with him about, he's very Jesus critical, but anyway, I don't agree with him there. There's another channel called DITRH, which stands for Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, which is a guy called David Weiss. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of them, but those I find David Weiss in particular goes on endless podcasts and streams and things explaining it. So he talks about things like that, skeleton density and stuff. So if you look up his, he's called flatearthdave.com, I think. Anyway,
why don't you show this video here? Because I do have some more things I want to talk about.
Yeah, and I've got actually a separate video if this sound plays. But this is a short one. Let me know if it works now.
Mummy of a giant, California, 1985. The body was found in a cave by prospectors, an excellent state of preservation, over 9 feet high. Over the head, a leather hood used for burial, a shroud. So again, I typed just a few words from the article into the AI, and here's what it made. I just love it, brings a new dimension.
Okay, you're ruining everything for everybody.
Paper.
Sorry.
The AI stuff, man. Okay, can you pause it real quick? If you had asked me to construct a story, like to construct a stream about giants 5 years ago, and you were like, go get some pictures from Google and stuff and get some articles and stuff, it would have been at least 70% easier.
Yes.
Because nowadays it's all this AI, and all of the articles that I remember reading 5 years ago, and like I remember like saving them and stuff, they're not on the internet anymore. They're gone.
Yeah, no, it's
just this weird like, well, that's technology for you. Okay, I'm sorry. Continue.
Yeah. Let's see what he has to say. And then I said, there's another channel I could show, maybe after you present more, because there's a bunch of different stuff. But there is an interesting channel, this guy Stellium 7, that I've also got about maybe a 5-minute excerpt.
Yeah,
one of his.
I just have a little corroboration to do so it won't take too long.
Being on record, though somewhat shrunk since he was alive. The corpse of the biggest man that ever lived has been dug up near San Diego. At all events, there is no satisfactory record in ancient or modern history of any human being nearly so tall. So you saw that in Calaveras County and on the Comstock and the hydraulic mining they were doing, they found the giants that were 20, 30, 40, 50 plus feet tall, and horses that were over 50 feet tall. So as you get closer to surface level, we get smaller and smaller and smaller. I'm sure that's not too hard to imagine if we can talk openly about titans. And if, again, you're not familiar with Stellium's work, check it out. If we're dealing with, titan elephants, that are miles and miles long, it's not too hard to wrap your mind around. But again, you have to really take in a lot of information from a lot of different sources to start to build your own image of things. Again, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm just, kind of giving you the history through my lens and using papers to help with that. The mummy, for in such a condition the remains were found, is that of a person who must have been about 9 feet high in life. This makes allowances for shrinkage, which may be pretty closely calculated. The cadaver has been carefully inspected and measured by Professor Thomas Wilson, curator of the Department of Prehistoric Anthropology at the Smithsonian Institute. The tape line even now registers the length from here.
There you go. Keep going, or is this guy's a little dry?
Keep going.
Keep going. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The top of the head at 8 feet 4 inches. The mummy is that of an Indian and is almost certainly prehistoric, though its age cannot be determined with any sort of accuracy. Historical records of the part of California where it was found go back for at least 250 years. And
okay, you can pause it there. And I'll let you say anything you'd like to say about it, because what he just said kind of ties right into something else I wanted to show.
Yeah, no, maybe you go. I don't have much to add here. The other guy, he just mentioned Stellium 7, which is the other channel that I said I have an excerpt from. I mean, he does some long streams and interviews with people, but I found a 5-minute excerpt that I thought was kind of interesting to show on this other channel, Stellium 7. But I'll stop sharing the screen, Patrick, and you do your thing, and then let me know when I can go back to.
Sure.
I'll share the other one, and yeah.
So
ahead.
off of that, he said that is an Indian that he found there. I was actually going to show something from the Bible, so that's not what I'm going to show anymore. I had a different thing that I was going to bring up because I was anticipating that there might be some people saying things like, things like all this is bullshit, and that there's, you only get it in the Bible and it's not found anywhere else. So to that end, I got two things.
Patrick, you're muted, Patrick.
Oh my God.
You're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I figured I'd bring up giant human skeletons on Wikipedia to see what Wikipedia has to say. Normally it's pretty bullshit. So throughout the 19th century, some scholars expressed doubt about the excavations of purported giants, but had little impact on public perception, which is curious to me that the public, up until very recently, always perceived the existence of giants as something that was kind of just accepted in antiquity. Terribly fascinating. Many readers embraced, which I could also go into with a different thing. Many readers embraced the skeletons as evidence of biblical history against unpopular experts whose discoveries undermined a literal interpretation of the Bible. So that's like the fight we've got right in front of us. Many readers embraced the skeletons as evidence of biblical history against unpopular experts whose discoveries undermined a literal interpretation of the Bible. So these unpopular experts at the time, I assume, we're saying things like, these aren't giants, these are yada, yada, yada. It doesn't matter what they were saying. They were saying they're not giants. The Bible's bullshit. With a rise in white literacy rates and the emergence of the cheaper penny press newspapers, there was a strong market for these tales that gave them greater impact than university scholarship. I would like to point out that this is a statement from Wikipedia, and if you can read, I love reading into propaganda. It's my favorite thing. When people try to write something in a propaganda format and they think they've been slick about it, but they haven't. This person who's writing this article very obviously thinks that giants is straight up bullshit. And so he's written this line in here.
Yeah.
To essentially say the only reason anybody treated these reports with any sort of legitimacy is because, well, it was white literacy rates were up and the white man wanted to feel better about himself. So they gave them a greater impact. They focused on the giant stories that made them feel better about themselves. I love that. That's hilarious to me. It in no way combats the argument of giants. All it does is say, well, white literacy was up, so it's just must be a white man problem, which is, okay. Stories frequently ran presenting as straight fact, hoaxes, scams, and misrepresentations of extinct megafauna. Stories frequently, isn't that fascinating? I love how these people can say these things with a straight face after COVID having occurred. Stories ran presenting as straight fact. Okay. Some newspapers outright fabricated stories. Really? That sounds ridiculous. And I mentioned this here because I found this fascinating. The St. Louis Evening Chronicle published the account of researchers who explored a subterranean city beneath Moberly, Missouri. The account described massive underground streets where a skeleton, 3 times larger than a typical human, so approximately 15 feet tall, was found slumped over a public fountain. Other newspapers reported the Moberly claims as factual and republished the entire story, including implausible details, like the researcher who, upon drinking from the skeleton's fountain, described the water as very sweet and nice. You would think that if they wanted to come up with implausible details to imply that this guy's lying, they would have come up with something a little bit better than he described the water he drank from as sweet and nice. Those are the implausible, this this paragraph right here, for everybody following along at home, is a perfect example of propaganda. This one right here. It's so fantastic in how it uniformly completely dismisses any possibility of giants. This is how you know if somebody's lying to you or not. If somebody's not lying to you and they don't believe in giants, they'll say something like, I don't believe in giants. I think it's nonsense because of XYZ. If somebody's lying to you, they will just present it to you as fact. They will say, giants weren't real. This is nonsense. And how could we? So this person's obviously a liar because they said this, that, or the other. Anyway, I found that interesting. And also that means I got to go to Moberly here pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, the age we're in, one thing I've realized in my life is the age we're in has made everybody unwittingly arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like people are conscious of being that way. It's just that we're all far too certain. But the corollary to that is that we're also way too bored.
Yes.
You know, that you're a little kid born into the world. I remember this state of mind. I try and recapture it at times, particularly when I'm trying to create inventive drawings and sort of channel that. But when you're born little, you're born young and you first come into awareness, you have a state of wonder, you know, at least I did. I remember it clearly. And it's like you're not jaded. So you see things very purely. But then we get given all these concepts of things and we're told, oh, that's just a tree. Giants didn't exist, this and this. And then everyone just is the way they are mostly, is that they're just very bored with everything. And that's the fascinating thing to me is that all this stuff can, when you realize there really may be something to it, it kind of reawakens your sense of wonder and your interest in the world.
Doesn't it?
You stop being jaded. You see that maybe there is an explanation and you stop being as arrogant because you say, oh, actually, I don't know, which can be a real factor when you get into, if you unfortunately get into arguments with people to say, well, prove it then. If the Earth's not a spinning ball and it's going through space, then what is it? Prove it exactly. And you have to say that then you're going to look weak because you say, well, I don't actually know.
Yeah. I would agree with you too. Like there's that huge, and I think that's sometimes when you know something is real versus when it's not, when, like you said, that once you are able to move past, you know, okay, this is all fake. They all say it's fake. Once you're able to take that step over and then you look at the world with new eyes and you're like, oh my God, this shit is fascinating. Like all of this is so cool. All like even the genealogical timelines in the Bible.
There's so much.
It was the most boring thing to me for my whole life. And then now it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And I'm like, wait, he lived. Okay, wait a minute. What's the name there? Okay. Let's, you know, it becomes, and I think that's how you know if something's real or not. Because on the one hand, you've got like, okay, you're told this is real. All right. I believe it now. All right. Everything's solved. I guess I can just move on to my Netflix and my weed now.
Yeah. You know what it makes me think of, Patrick, is it's looping back to what you were mentioning earlier about psychology, because in as much as you study these subjects, which are exterior or in the past, but they're in the outer world, you're also studying psychology. And we'll come back to that comment in a second.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to 4 of them there.
It's a dual-pronged thing, because in as much as you study the subjects, you're forced to actually deal with your own psychology. And if you have any ability to be self-aware and examine it, what you discover is also fascinating, and it's more examples of what people will call a conspiracy if they don't understand what you're talking about. So let me explain. Like what you discover is that there are fear implants that are put in everybody, but unconsciously. Because if someone comes along and says, bro, prove, when was I fear implanted? Are you saying it's like the Matrix where they put a bug in me? It's like, no, but somehow through the years of schooling, government schooling, you got used to the idea of conforming and not contradicting people, the consensus of the mass of people, because you know you'll be socially ostracized. It's like the pecking order of chickens. The other chickens will all notice and go, oh, he's not conforming. They'll start pecking you,
right?
You're overtly or subtly. So what that is what I call one example of many fear implants, is that I think there are a lot of people, that sense that there may be something to a lot of these things, but they don't want to go very far into it, because if they go just a little bit too far past the electric fence, they're suddenly in a strange new land. and it's terrifying because they realize, well, eventually you can't go back, and I don't fit in anyway. And so there's all these barriers that are put towards people. But if you have a taste for truth, you see, well, yeah, but what do I want? If I want truth, I got to keep going. I'm like an explorer, stranger in a strange land. I'm like, I got to keep going because if it's real, it's real. And then you realize, like I said, the psychological side, that somehow all of this has been engineered. I can't explain how, but there's a structure that people follow to keep everything normalized. And the weird thing as the last part of that is there's a good side to it because, everyone drives on their right here. And in Britain, they drive on the left side of the road. They obey the stoplights and society rolls on. So there's a certain order and there's a certain coherence given to society because of that. But on the other hand, it's very limiting. So it's like kind of a fortress that we're all kept in, or a prison. But, it's got orderly rules, but you're still in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So, depends on what you want, if you want to be free.
Yeah. Let me read these comments here real quick. I had something I wanted to say, but I'm going to hold on to it for a minute here. Skeleton Core says, people just saw mammoth skulls and thought they were cyclopses when just across the Mediterranean, North African nations used elephants for war. Exactly. Like sometimes the willful ignorance gets a little tiresome. The old buildings prove there were giants. They were up to 15 feet tall and strong and healthy. I believe that wholeheartedly. I just think the later giants were anomalous. I would agree with you there. I would also say that I'm a proponent of the belief that sin affects genetics. So when they say things in the Bible like onto the 7th generation, I think that's literal.
Yeah.
And I think that while certain people have descended from these races of giants and stuff, they don't have the giantism anymore. They don't have the genetic aspects that would make them inclined to sin, I guess is what I'm saying.
But Kevin's touching on, are you probably touching on those images of giant doors and...
Well, I think he's talking about that certainly, but I think he's talking also about that picture of that fella you showed.
Yeah.
Like that, what was his name? Bradwell?
Robert Wadlow.
Robert Wadlow. I would agree, and I think this is what Kevin's saying, that, yeah, he says yes. I think that that guy was probably a genetic anomaly.
Yes.
I think that he was something else. Like he wasn't like, before we said, I'm a 5, so I think that there are literal giants still alive on the planet. Yes, but we'll talk about that at a different time.
Where do you think they are?
We have an entire different.
Me hanging
that
here.
Could be an entire hour and a half, man.
Just give me
essentially, let me put it like this: my beliefs about giants have come from a 3-4 year long period of research and discovery in regards to UFOs. Only aliens and UFOs. So I'll preface it that way and say, that's where I come from, and this is where I'm here now. So we can talk about that at a different time.
Okay.
Because the UFO subject is actually the one that I'm most well-versed in. And
we're going to talk Bob Lazar.
We're going to talk all kinds of things. Bob Lazar is not even the tip of the iceberg. He's the first 2 inches of the iceberg.
But you realize, of course, that if you go full flat Earth in the sense that we're in a terrarium and there's no space, then it just murders the UFO idea the way it's presented. They could be something else. But
certainly the way it's presented, I will agree with that. I'm, to be honest with you, and I said this the last time, I'm not entirely 100% convinced by. It's like this: is the Earth flat or is it round? I don't really care. I do think that there's a high likelihood that there are other planes of existence that exist where other people exist, and that they might have created technology that led them to visit here. At the same time, this is where it gets tricky. I think that the only cultures that have been allowed to leave their plane of existence are ones that are blessed and holy.
Yes, but I mean, what I'm saying is you still believe in the idea of space and an infinite expanding universe and all that?
I believe that that the universe is infinite and that God can do whatever he wants. That's what I
Okay,
believe.
but I'm just trying to, and I'm not trying to pin you down too much. I'm just trying to say, like, do you
No, you're
believe
fine.
that there's an infinite vacuum out there of something, or would it be air or something other realm? Like, do you see what I mean? Like, there has to be something that we're in. In
Yeah.
the Bible, it says the waters
I,
above and the waters below,
if
and there was a bubble made where we live.
right.
Yeah, with that conception of a physical reality,
I
there's
don't
literally nowhere to
think
go.
that
We're like
space
in a
is empty.
terrarium.
Yeah, I don't think that space is empty. I think that space is full of life. I think
No,
it's
I'm
full
saying
of
that.
things and people
Okay,
and
so
places. And
but I think I think it was in C.S. Lewis. I don't know if you've read that one, Kevin, Out of the Silent Planet, or Patrick, science fiction book by C.S. Lewis. He didn't picture space the same
yeah,
way.
I've read all three of them.
Yeah, I think he pictures space as full of light. I
We're
was
on
about to
delay
say
here.
that
Hold on a second.
that he said it was full of water, but I don't think so. But what I'm saying is that if you are you calling space in your conception, like the way you mentally think of the world, is that there's an infinite space of water around us, and that's like a universe teeming with life, or you're talking about like heaven and angels and things like that, or you're saying that it could be other life that travels here, but through like water, or you see what I mean? You get pinned down with these things, like what is it actually? I personally don't believe
Yeah.
it's a vacuum, a deadly
Well,
vacuum.
I don't have an answer for what it is.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
believe
That's
that
okay.
there's the earth that we live on, and I think that the earth that we live on has had a very specific historical background, which
Yes.
includes the angels of God coming down and having sex with human women and creating giants. And I think that that's all very specific to Earth and this plane of existence and this
Yes.
type of existence. And
Yes.
I think that this type of existence is made for a very specific reason, and that is to test souls. Um, I think that the universe is infinite because God is infinite. And if he has decided that somewhere else in some other place, he has made, a globe planet or a flat planet or a triangular planet or whatever, he's done it and it exists. And those people who live there, which I don't consider souls from one planet to a different planet, different species to a different species, they're all the same to me. Everybody's a person if you have a soul that has the choice of free will. And I think that God has given free will to everything that he truly loves. And so I think that there are people out there who are from different planes of existence or planets or whatever you want to call them, who have possibly been here and experienced this planet. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
I'm not going to say those people. What I would say is the historical, like the shit that's gone down on this planet has been primarily this planet stuff. It's all stuff that revolves around this planet, not aliens. So when you have like, what's his name? Stetchen. What's his name? Fucking
Yes.
the Chariot of the
Nikolai.
Gods guy.
Nikolai.
Nikolai Stetchen, whatever his name
Sechin.
is.
I think it's Sechin. Yeah.
He's like aliens came down from
Nibiru, the other
space
planet.
and yeah I'm not on that wavelength. At this point that stuff seems like 50s 60s sci-fi to me, which is cool, but it's not realistic. What's realistic is that everything in regards to this planet happens in regards to this planet, and all the alien stuff that we ever experience is the most anomalous, most random stuff that anybody's ever experienced, and you probably won't experience it again. And it's got very little to do at all with our existence as human people on planet Earth. So while I admit that aliens might be real, I would say that the vast experiences that people have had across cultures on this planet have been almost exclusively spiritual in nature. Let me catch up with the chat here real quick.
Yeah.
JD Kirby, the kind-hearted, you lying son bitch. He says, I'm a saint, not quite, and I'm a giant. You might be.
Giants.
You're a giant son bitch. And he says, and an alien. Yeah, no, you're awesome. All right, you're an alien too. Kevin Wolf says, there's other lands. Dude,
I agree.
Okay. We're going to have to hold on to that. I'm going to save that comment for the end here. Covered in ice, most likely right now. I'm saving that comment. The way Balthazar got unpersoned by his school and former employees was spooky AF. Yes, sir, it was. That's again, Bob Lazar is just the tip of the iceberg, folks. He's like that's like ufology 101 class right there. It's flat, says Kevin. No, I should have read that earlier. The universe is constantly growing, says JD Kirby. It's more like your ego's constantly growing, JD. I'm sorry, Master. Please don't whip me later for these things.
He's lashing out.
Stitchin. Yes.
Yeah, that was it.
Yes. Stitchin. Yes. I think outside the firmament is irrelevant. We can never get to it. Our demon controllers keep trying, though. That's what CERN is doing. See, Kevin Wolf, that's exactly what I think.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant. Not that it's not real, not that it doesn't happen, but that it's irrelevant.
But Patrick, you're a different number than Kevin and I on the, my 1 to 5 grading system on the flat Earth thing. You're a different number because when you go full number 5, you believe, like I say, believe, whatever. It seems to me there's no planets, there's no space, there's none of that. It's just, the idea that, like, if you go into some of these channels like DITRH, David Weiss, he has some really good videos where he talks about this, and it connects to the Big Bang. So, and debunking that, or just not believing it because it's so ridiculous. The idea that there was this big ball of everything that was nothing, but there was nothing around it. Like, you go, well, what did it exist in? I don't know. It was just primordial everythingness, nothingness, and it decided for some reason to explode. And then it exploded and kept infinitely expanding.
That's God, though.
That's what they say. But just think of it just literally. How could any of this be? It's impossible to even, like, and then this David Weiss had a very good video where he's talking about this. He says this in many of his videos. I'm only doing a crude, like, reconstruction of his line of argument, but it spoke to me, which was, then you say, like, okay, so all these gases are expanding infinitely outwards in this medium, this vacuum. But then some of it, for some reason, decided to coalesce into gravity, like balls of planets, and then it just somehow decided to start spinning or moving or organize themselves into galaxies and solar systems and so on. And the whole thing is just what you have to do is what you're not allowed to do, which I gave myself permission, and so do other people. It's like, I just laugh at that. That's like, now I laugh at it. That's ridiculous. I'm not saying I can prove anything. I'm just saying, to myself, I can prove that just sounds incredibly dumb. Like, why would some of it start coalescing into planets? And then, like, even David Weiss, I was watching a video the other day, and he said great things. Like, he said, okay, they say the Earth has got a molten core, and it's really super hot. So he's saying, like, why, when you go deep down in the ocean, doesn't it get hotter and hotter? Then there's going to be endless there's going to be endless fancy explanations and excuses. Well, that's because of this. But like Kevin just said on screen there, they're crafty liars that come up with more and more and more elaborate lies that cross connect. But at some point, when you vault out of them and you just go, none of this makes sense. Like, and that gets into the whole, level playing world thing. When you really examine that topic, there's so much that doesn't make sense. But I only mentioned the thing about Bob Lazar and aliens because you do get into these contradictions, because let's say there was no space and they're not coming. And he's talking about alien warp drives where the spaceship turns over and they point the 3 pointers at the distant thing and they're instantly transported through space-time to this other destination, and all this, like, complicated stuff that sounds great and enthralling. But I just kind of go, I'm more in the camp where people say, like, if these aliens are probably demons, and they're not, certainly whatever they are, they're not coming from interstellar space. And the narratives being put on us now about aliens is a long, like Kevin said, carefully crafted lies from Roswell onwards, building up to the Project Bluebeam business, where they're going to do they're going to impersonate the return of the second coming by or something like this. There's a whole narrative about that makes a lot more sense to me, at least as a plausible explanation to map all this and say, okay, that's what they're heading towards. And then, the thing about Werner von Braun, the Nazi who became the head of NASA, and
don't get me started on Werner von Braun.
So he apparently confided to his secretary that the final thing will be the fake alien invasion. So again, all of this is kind of hearsay, but it's interesting that these are data points that align to this idea that there is a long narrative in play, and it's going to bamboozle everybody into thinking
Yes.
that there's this big alien invasion. Like if I go outside my apartment tomorrow and there's giant motherships, I'm just going to laugh and go, this is just completely dumb. Of course, they may fry me, but it's like that guy's laughing. Just you're toast.
Yes.
I think
at that point, Paul, it's going to be, at that point when the alien ships start coming, I think. So the way I look at the past 10, 15, 20 years in society has been ways to remove the dissidents. COVID was the biggest way. COVID is the most obvious, in your face, like we're trying to remove critical, free-thinking people from our society right now. And we'll do that by, saying, well, you got to get the vaccine passport. If you don't have the vaccine, then you can't live your life anymore. And the vaccine itself, I think the vaccine, and I'm sorry to anybody who's got it, I think that it's going to kill you. That's just a conspiracy theory, for YouTube's sake. That's a conspiracy theory. I'm lying about that. That's a comedy act, whatever, whatever you want to say. I think the fact of the matter is they were trying to get rid of free thinking, critical thinking individuals, and they either got them all on a list of names of people who wouldn't, or they got you, and now it's over. I think the next step, you're right though, is to kill a large swath of human people, and then to pose the alien thing to them, because if you pose the alien thing after you've killed a bunch of humans and you've said, look, guys, this is what the aliens can do to us, who is going to deny? You say, okay, we need more funding to kill these people militarily. All right, they'll give you the money. We need, the moment that you've killed a bunch of people and made everybody else afraid, the non-critically thinking people, and you say to them, we need this to do this, they will do what you ask them to do. And I think that's the next step.
I think, this gets me into thinking, Patrick, about, I've even seen sort of people on X allude to this, like they kind of say like, well, what's the point of like waking up or what talking about all this stuff?
Wait, I'm sorry. Skeleton Corey says, I hope they look like Orions. Heck, I'll even take some Romulan looking at alien women.
Good old Star Trek, right? I grew up with that stuff too. No, I was going to say, the thing is that it's not just pointless mind games. Yeah, no, these people exist. It's as I tweeted today, I think it was, I knew someone quite well who believed in some of this stuff. I won't say who, but population control, eugenics, and all that kind of stuff. And it's quite disturbing when you understand that there are people who are elitists who really see themselves as the anointed, and they really believe this stuff, and they won't talk about it openly all the time. And there's lots of traces of it in videos and different things. But what was I going to say? No, that ideas matter, and damn, leaving my head. I'm gonna have to vamp here.
Well, that's okay. Honestly, Paul, if I'm being honest with you, like everything's based on, for me, what's best for the human species. So if you were to say to me, Jesus Christ wasn't real, and I knew it, like if I knew that Jesus Christ wasn't real and God wasn't real, I would 100% be one of these elitists who wanted to wipe out 90% of the
That's a great observation.
100%. I would.
Okay, and actually,
like if we're talking about what's the, go ahead.
No, that leads me back to what I was going to say. Thank you. Like I was going to say, like that's where realization does make a material difference in the world. See, I've seen people try and say, oh, well, does all this stuff matter? It's just mind games. It's just like arguing about these things. And I just want to go, like you said, drink a beer and watch the game. But the idea is it will matter at some point. It'll matter when we die. It'll matter if there is a staged fake thing, which they clearly have the technology to do that, right? We've all seen these videos on X about, in China, they have these giant whales and displays that are flying through the air and crashing water and stuff, and it all looks real. Like holographic technology. It's a real admitted thing. So if this was to happen, where it will matter is if you have 5% of people that disbelieve it like us, and we laugh, that's not going to matter. Everyone goes along with it. Or if they say in January, like I've heard predictions, speculation, that there's a massive avian flu, bird flu outbreak, and everyone freaks out again, which I won't be at all surprised. That's where realization matters. Because imagine if the reverse was true, that you had 80 or 90% of people, it won't happen, but if it did, that were switched on and they were looking into this stuff, they actually bothered to do it, and they came to whatever point, to varying degrees, and they said, I don't believe that anymore. I don't know exactly what's real, but I'm not going to just automatically believe when they try and panic me, because they're trying to panic me. They're crafty liars, like Kevin said. That's where consciousness and realization, whether you're religious or not, would make a huge material difference on Earth. And unfortunately, that's all I can think of really to do, to try and just post things, even if people think it's nutty. I don't really care anymore. I mean, I think that I don't have the exact handle on what's true, but you can certainly point at all these common things that are being pushed on us that are clearly ridiculous when you stop and actually examine them. Frederick.
Yeah.
Oh, Frederick Guimont, is that?
Frederick. It's pronounced Frederick. It's French. You wouldn't understand.
Yeah, Guimont. I think I've got it right. Guimont. Well, nice to see you here.
You of all people, Paul, would understand because you live in Canada with Frederick.
Canada, yes.
But ladies and gentlemen, I've shared Paul's eBay store in the chat here. Please go check that out. There's a million different options of things that you can go check out. Really wonderful hand-drawn art by Paul himself, which I should have had in front of me. I'm going to show that on the Commandos on Wednesday, all the stuff you sent me that I got.
Yeah, cool.
I should have had it in front of me,
That's
but I
okay.
did not. But guys, you can go check out his eBay store on the link that I put in the chat there. This here is his YouTube channel. In the future, and I think we'll just decide, I think next week we'll just stream this show on his channel, and we'll double stream to both his and my channel if that's possible. If not, we'll just take turns and we'll just, we'll do it one after the other. But go subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can get all of his notifications there. He's got a bunch of different videos about all kinds of stuff that YouTube literally never tells me about, which it's quite irksome.
Really?
But you can go do that right now. Oh. He's laughing at me. No, literally, Paul, like now that I'm looking at it, like I know I've been subscribed and have all the notifications, and it just doesn't show me anything.
Weird. I know there's games
like
going on.
It never tells me. It'll show me like random live streams about fucking furries before it'll show me your stuff. And it's like,
yeah.
Can you just show me the stuff I want to watch? Like, please.
Thanks for the plug
okay.
there.
So yeah, guys, go. I'm gonna share that. Wait, I'm gonna share that in the chat here. Hold on, let me grab that. Burp, 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 burp. And now it is in the chat there. Click on that link. Frederick, you're gonna have to go back and watch it. What will go on my permanent record? I didn't do anything this time.
Well, he's right though. He's right. Like when you realize that all of these things, like it's all harvesting of data, right? Like X, I'm sure that's why I gave up even worrying at all.
Come and get me.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is like, if it's all going on algorithms and they're all figuring out everything about you, then everything I've said about the demons controlling the world is true. So that means demons are trying to get at me, which also means that I'm doing a good thing, which means go fuck yourselves. I win. Jesus is on my side, not your side. All right. So I shared your eBay. I shared your YouTube. There's still some things I wanted to show about the antiquities of the Jews. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I've got something, after you, I've got something to present as we round this out.
Well, to be honest, Paul, I want to close it down for the night.
Okay.
We can save these things for a different time.
All right.
What do you do with those streams? Stop it. And no, there are some, but see, the problem is, Paul, if we start talking about these things, it'll be another 30 to 40 minutes. So
Fair
I just don't want to get. So what we'll do is and this subject, giants, is one that we can always bring up and talk about at any given time. So we will do that. I have 2 other things I wanted to talk about, but we've got time for that later. Let me share this real quick. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've got $10 to spare, technically $18 if you live in America, go check out Phenomenal Tales #1, Minotaur. This is my second comic book I've ever released. The first one, Phenomenon Comic Magazine #1, is right here with a brand new Jimmy Reyes cover colored by Peter Gilmore. We have Phenomenal Tales #1 with the cover by Peter Gilmore and the colors by Peter Gilmore and line work by Claudio Sepulveda and line art by Claudio Sepulveda. That's what we talked about. And I did the layouts for this comic book, and I also wrote it and created it. So it's my little baby. So Phenomenal Tales #1, only $10 right now. It used to be 24 pages. Now it's 26 pages due to editing. So we're at 2,091 right now, folks. We want to get that to 5 by the end of the month, just so I can keep bringing you guys excellent stories from myself, Claudio, and Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Paul, obviously, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Are you copacetic with it being on your channel next time?
Oh yeah, we'll work that out. But yes, we could try that, and I'm sure there's even a way to dual stream it. But yeah, and thanks for everybody in the chat for showing up and interacting.
Yes.
That's great.
My brothers in the chat. Tonight we had Frederick Gumont, we had Kevin Wolf, and we had Skeleton Core Comics. So thank you guys, you 3, for coming out tonight in the chat. Anyway, I know we had a few other people watching, but I appreciate you guys commenting and so yeah, have a great night, folks. Before we go, actually, Skeleton Core says, "Great stream, guys." Frederick says, "Giants are big this year." Good one.
That's a good one.
Great to hear 2 minds think of it. And Kevin says, "Aliens exist and they have debit cards and will soon be wearing blue helmets in the sovereign country near you."
There you go.
I think Kevin Wolf and I might be more on the same wavelength than I previously supposed.
Well, yeah, me too.
Come back and watch my channel more.
Okay.
Yeah. Peace out, guys.
Thanks,
nice
everybody.
to see you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.